Stop making a scene, he barely touched you. Girls bruise easy. Mom's voice curled like steam from a kettle, sweet on the surface, scalding underneath. The world tilted. My breath came in paper-thin rips. Pain sang up my left arm like struck metal. Somewhere in the house, a football game cheered, as if the living room were a stadium and I was the halftime joke. I tasted copper and silence at the same time. Everyone my name is Hollis Ray, and my hands used to shake whenever a door hinge sighed at night. I learned to count the distance between footsteps and the refrigerator light, between the apology they rehearsed for church and the truth stitched into my skin. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being quiet. Keep your voice down, Mom hissed, teeth grazing her lower lip. He has a future. She darted a glance toward the hallway where Dad's shadow drifted, the triumphant shape of a man who believed the house was an echo chamber built in his honor. A cold spike split my forearm. I knew the sound before I knew the word. Crack. The kind of noise that makes your vision sprinkle with stars. The lamp leaned, the floor came up too fast, and somewhere above me Dad said, too casual, look what she made me do. As if I were a bad recipe that burned itself. At the ER, fluorescent lights peeled me open. The wrist brace bit, the X-ray glowed, and the machine hummed like an insect that feeds on secrets. Mom smoothed my hair in a motion she must have practiced on mirrors. We're a good family, she whispered, like she was reminding the walls. You're not going to ruin that. Stay quiet, he has a future. My throat learned how to lock. Then the doctor walked in. She didn't blink at the bruise map climbing my shoulder like spilled ink. She didn't flinch when I flinched. Instead she crouched to my eye level, the room's hum fading until there was only her steady breath and the ache thrumming like a drumline. You're safe now, she said, simple words, but they landed like soil after years of falling. My heart staggered. Safe? In this cold white box, under questions that could wake the dead? She turned, lifted the desk phone, and dialed with the certainty of someone lighting a match in a tunnel. Dad's name pulsed on my tongue. The dial tone cut like a blade. The line connected. She said, very calmly, I need to report something. And the room, my arm, my future, everything, stopped pretending to be quiet. The sound of her voice on that phone cracked the ceiling I'd been living under my whole life. Each syllable felt like a stone thrown through the stained glass window my mother tried so hard to polish, the illusion of our good family. Mom's hand clamped around mine, nails digging deep into my palm. Don't say a word, Hollis, she hissed, lips stretched into something almost like a smile for the nurse hovering by the doorway. We'll handle this ourselves. But for the first time, someone in the room wasn't playing along. The doctor didn't soften her tone, didn't lean into the performance. She stared at me, through me, and I felt my silence shiver. Yes, she said into the receiver, we have a suspected case of child abuse. Arm fracture. Multiple old contusions. Patient is female, 17. Her words weren't knives, they were keys, unlocking chains I didn't even know I'd been dragging. Dad's laugh echoed from the hall as if he could hear his own name being folded into a report. You think they'll believe you? He barked, stepping closer, voice dripping with that familiar mix of charm and venom. They'll laugh in your face, doctor. I coach football, for Christ's sake. I raise champions. His confidence was a skyscraper built on sand. I could see the cracks, even if Mom couldn't. She still stood by him like wallpaper, decorative, silent, impossible to peel off. The nurse shifted uneasily, blocking the doorway like a quiet shield. My arm throbbed beneath the brace, but it was my chest that carried the heaviest weight, the war between silence and truth. I wanted to vanish. I wanted to scream. But most of all, I wanted to believe the doctor's steady eyes, the way she seemed to see me not as the troublemaker my parents painted me to be, but as a girl worth saving. Help is on the way, she whispered once the call ended. Her voice was low, deliberate, meant for me alone. That was the moment I realized, silence had never been safety. Silence had been the cage. And tonight, someone finally found the key. The officer's shoes sounded like punctuation on linoleum when he entered, short, decisive steps that didn't wait for permission. He introduced himself with a name I didn't catch, then sat on the plastic chair like he intended to stay a while. Mom's face folded into a mask of practiced confusion, Dad's jaw tensed into a promise of war. Can you tell me what happened? The officer asked, and his voice had the careful neutrality of someone who had heard every version of a lie and learned to find the edges where truth bled through. I wanted to say everything all at once. The way the hallway smelled of old pipe tobacco and lemon cleaner, the way Dad's hand hovered like a question mark before it hit, the exact syllable of Mom's whisper, "He has a future." I wanted to tell him the small things no one would believe were important. The chipped mug Dad always used only when he was angry, the names Dad used when he wanted me to disappear. Instead I inhaled slow, tasting the antiseptic tang of the room, and told him how the lamp had fallen, how my arm had made that terrible sound. I said the truth in small, precise pieces so it couldn't be folded away. The officer wrote without looking up. His pen moved like a metronome. Dad tried to smile his way out, a sick, familiar diplomacy. "Misunderstanding," he said. "She's dramatic." He tried to slide past the officer's next question as if a football coach's schedule were an alibi. The officer's expression didn't shift. That tiny, unmoving line on his face felt like a verdict in waiting. Mom leaked apologies between sentences, but they were shaped more for the neighbors than for me. "We'll handle this," she whispered to the officer, too loud for secrecy. Her words were nails trying to close the coffin. When they asked if I had anyone to stay with, the house around me hummed with choices I didn't want. I thought of the neighbor who baked banana bread and pretended not to see late-night noises, of a cousin who always said, "Family sticks together," and of the truth that sticking together sometimes meant sticking to the wrong person. The officer asked if I wanted an advocate, someone who could sit in on interviews, explain procedures, hold my paper cup while I trembled. I nodded. To accept help felt like stepping onto a stage for the first time, terrified but certain. Outside, through a narrow window, I watched Dad light a cigarette and turn his face to the sky as if the stars owed him forgiveness. Inside, the nurse folded a blanket around my shoulders and pressed a thin card into my hand, an address, a number, a possible map out. I folded the card into my palm like a tiny flag. For the first time since the crack, I could feel space to breathe. The cage's lock had turned. The door wasn't open yet, but the hinges remembered movement. They moved me to a quiet room, one with soft yellow walls and no clock ticking on the wall. Time didn't matter there. Only breath did. The officer stayed close, his notepad resting on his knee like he knew I still had more to say. Mom sat across from me, clutching her purse so tightly the leather squeaked. "Hollis, don't ruin this family," she begged in a hushed tone, her eyes darting between me and the door. Her voice was syrup over broken glass. "Do you know what this will do to your father's career? To us." Her words slid into me like cold water, familiar and suffocating. For years, I believed keeping quiet was love, that silence was a kind of sacrifice. But sitting there with the ache still radiating from my arm, I realized it had only ever been surrender. The advocate arrived then. A woman with steady shoulders and eyes that didn't flinch. She introduced herself simply, then turned to me. "You don't have to speak until you're ready," she said. The way she looked at me felt like sunlight on stone, slowly warming cracks I thought would never mend. Dad burst in, voice raised, authority dripping like sweat from his forehead. "This is insane. She's lying. Tell them, Hollis." His command boomed, the same tone that once made me clean my room in silence, the same tone that swallowed whole dinners. But something shifted. The advocate's hand was near mine, not holding, just near enough. The officer stayed seated, unshaken. The doctor reappeared at the doorway, arms crossed, watching like a witness who refused to be erased. And me? For the first time, I didn't shrink. I inhaled slowly, chest rising against years of compression. My voice came small, but it came, "I'm not lying." Dad froze, as if the air itself betrayed him. Mom's lips parted, her mask trembling. The officer's pen moved again, scratching my words into permanence. And just like that, silence no longer belonged to him. It belonged to me. The words hung there, "I'm not lying," like smoke that refused to clear. Dad's shoulders stiffened, his jaw grinding so hard the muscles twitched beneath his skin. 4 years, that look had been the signal, prepare for the storm. But this time, the storm met a wall it couldn't break through. The officer rose, steady and calm. "Sir, I'll need you to step outside." His voice carried authority sharp enough to cut. Dad laughed, a hollow, ugly sound. "You people don't get it. She's my daughter. She knows how dramatic she can be. Don't you, Hollis?" His eyes locked on me, daring me to fold back into the obedient girl he raised. But my arm ached inside its brace, a reminder carved into bone. I held his gaze, throat burning, but I didn't look away. "No," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "Not this time." Mom whimpered, as though my words were daggers aimed at her instead. "Please, Hollis. Think of the future. You don't want to destroy everything." Her hands trembled in her lap, twisting her purse straps until the leather groaned. The advocate leaned toward me, speaking gently but loud enough for all to hear. "Her future isn't built on silence." Something broke then, not in me, but in the script my parents had rehearsed all my life. The officer guided Dad toward the hallway. Dad resisted, sputtering excuses, but the doorway swallowed his voice until only the hum of fluorescent lights remained. Mom sat slumped, mascara smudging beneath her eyes. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear, not of him, but of what my truth could unravel. "I didn't mean for this to go so far," she whispered, voice cracking like fragile porcelain. But I didn't answer. My silence wasn't her shield anymore, it was mine. The advocate placed a folder in front of me, papers crisp and deliberate. "This starts the process," she said. "You don't have to walk it alone." I touched the folder, fingertips brushing across the weight of it. For once, the weight didn't press me down. It lifted. Because maybe, just maybe, the cage had finally lost its lock. That night, they placed me in a temporary shelter. The walls were plain, the bed stiff, but the air felt different, lighter, as if it wasn't waiting to collapse under Dad's footsteps. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my arm cradled against me, replaying the doctor's words on a loop. "You're safe now." Safe. I tried to taste the word, but it felt foreign, almost dangerous. For 17 years, safety meant predicting moods, walking on glass floors, swallowing every scream. Now it was a file folder on a plastic desk, a stranger's phone number scribbled on a card, a thin blanket that smelled faintly of detergent. Fragile, but real. The advocate visited the next morning. She sat across from me with coffee in one hand and a stack of forms in the other. "You'll be asked questions. Hard ones. About things you've lived with for too long. But every answer you give is another piece of truth. And truth is heavier than his reputation." I nodded, though my stomach twisted. Part of me still feared Dad would walk through the door, his shadow long enough to stretch into this new space. But the door stayed closed. At the hearing, I sat across a table from my parents. Dad's suit was iron sharp, his tie a shade of blue that once meant victory. Mom wore pearls that clinked softly when she wrung her hands. They both looked at me like I was the one on trial. The officer read from his notes, the doctor testified with clinical calm, and I felt my heart pound against the brace like it wanted out. When it was my turn, the room blurred, yet my voice carried. I described the sound of bone, the silence of dinners, the bruises I explained away as clumsiness. Each word landed on the record like a nail sealing a box. Dad smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Mom whispered my name, pleading. And then the judge leaned forward, her gavel resting like a promise. "We've heard enough for today," she said. Her tone wasn't final yet, but it was heavy. Heavy in a way that made my lungs ache with possibility. Days bled into weeks, each one stitched with interviews, signatures, and the slow unraveling of a story I had buried under excuses. The shelter became a strange kind of home, children laughing down the hall, the faint smell of instant noodles, voices swapping secrets of survival. For the first time, I wasn't the only one carrying shadows. One afternoon, the advocate slid a document toward me. "Protective order," she explained. Her words felt like an iron gate slamming shut between me and the life I used to know. Dad's name, written in stark black ink, was no longer just mine to fear, it was bound by law. But the courtroom still haunted me. Dad's smirk lingered in my memory, his confidence stretching like a stain across every corner. He believed reputation could silence truth. He believed I'd falter before the final step. The day of the verdict, the air inside the courthouse was thick with whispers. I sat at the back, arm healed enough to move but still stiff when I stretched too far. My parents were across the aisle, Dad rigid, Mom brittle, her pearls gleaming like tiny chains around her throat. When the judge read the decision, time fractured. Words blurred, but the meaning was sharp. Custody revoked, charges pending, immediate removal from the home. Dad erupted, his voice booming, This is a circus. She's ruining us. Security moved faster than I'd ever seen. He wasn't untouchable anymore. Mom covered her mouth, eyes fixed on me as if I had set the whole world on fire. But the truth was simpler. I had just lit a match in a room already soaked in gasoline. The gavel struck once, firm. The sound echoed like thunder rolling through the valley of every memory I carried. And for the first time, the storm wasn't mine to survive. It was theirs. Still, when I walked out of that courthouse, the air didn't taste like victory. It tasted like something unfinished, like an echo waiting to resolve. Because justice had begun, yes. But closure was still on the horizon. The weeks that followed felt like learning to breathe with new lungs. My arm healed, but it was the silences inside me that took longer to mend. No longer the silences of fear, these were pauses of choosing when and how to speak. They belonged to me now. I stayed in the shelter until arrangements were made. A foster family offered a spare bedroom, warm meals, and something I hadn't known I craved, the quiet sound of people who didn't raise their voices to be heard. The first night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, normal sounds that no longer signaled danger. They were proof I had stepped into a world where footsteps didn't end in bruises. Sometimes, though, I caught myself flinching at shadows, or bracing when someone's hand moved too quickly. Trauma doesn't leave like an uninvited guest, it lingers, testing the locks. But I also found strength blooming in unexpected places, in the doctor's steady gaze when she called me safe, in the advocate's unshakable presence, in my own voice the day I said, "I'm not lying." At school, whispers followed me. Some kids muttered about my dad, the coach with the perfect reputation. Others avoided me entirely, afraid truth might be contagious. I didn't correct them. Their silence wasn't my burden to carry. One afternoon, I stood outside the courthouse again, not for testimony, but because the advocate asked if I wanted to read the final ruling. Dad's name, once carved into my fear, was now tethered to words like restraining order and supervised contact only. Mom's pleas had melted into the background, powerless against the paper trail of truth. I folded the ruling carefully, tucking it into my bag like a keepsake, not because I wanted to remember the pain, but because I needed proof that cages can be broken. When I looked at the sky, it didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt wide. Endless. Mine. If this ever happened to you, say same in the comments. Because I survived. Because silence isn't safety. Because my story doesn't end with him. It ends here, with me.